So Bill Cosby. Kurt, I know you talked about him recently.
Yeah, I did a discussion of him last night. The state of Pennsylvania is reaching hard.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
I
would
haven't
agree.
done a deep dive on this. I just saw superficially. I'm like, oh boy, they're really trying to get a second bite of the apple here. I mean, this, yeah. So Kurt, maybe you can start off this one
Yeah.
since you've done the deep
So
dive.
the first thing that I think is worthy of noting is in that their petition for certiorari for the Supreme Court
hold
to
on.
hear it.
Sorry, before we get into the petition, let's do just a little bit of background just to make sure that people are up to.
Was I starting to law geeky? I'm sorry.
Let's
Bill Cosby
get
drugged people.
What's that?
Let's start with Bill Cosby drugged girls. Let's start with that.
So he was found guilty of.
He admitted to
it. He admitted to it because yes, he was found guilty of actually drugging a woman and doing terrible things to them that we can all use our imaginations for, so that this video doesn't get yeeted. Don't imagine too hard though, please. But so he had a criminal trial and there was a civil trial that happened around the same time. So he was expected to plead the fifth in the criminal trial or in the civil trial because of the possibility of criminal liability. But the local prosecutor made a press release where they said, we don't expect to prosecute Bill Cosby. And so he took that as, okay, well, I therefore no longer have a Fifth Amendment issue here. So I will then go and testify in this civil case. And so because of that, he, didn't have any Fifth Amendment rights to non-incrimination. But the problem is then the next DA that came in said, no, we want to prosecute you. And they did. And then he was prosecuted and he was found guilty. And then he spent 2 years in prison. And then I guess his defense team appealed because of that prior public statement by the defense, or by the prosecution, by the DA, I should say. And that they made the argument that he relied upon that statement by the prosecutor, that he would not be prosecuted, and that the only reason why he testified to anything was because of that assurance that he got. And which court was this in when they appealed? Was it the Pennsylvania Supreme Court?
Pennsylvania?
Yeah, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is where this ball stopped so far.
Okay, so they said, you're actually right. We don't allow for prosecutors to back off on their agreements with criminal defendants or potential criminal defendants. They should be able to rely on your statement like that. So that is a potential constitutional issue. Yeah, a due process issue, really, for any defendant, regardless of whether you think that they have done terrible things, is pretty much not disputed. I mean, if you go and see statements that Bill Cosby has made since then, he still maintains his innocence or whatever, but I don't know who else out there is actually believing those statements at this point. So not many people.
Because he's made an admission and then said he clawed it back, and it's like just at this point, let it ride.
Yeah. So anyway, but now the DA has decided to file a petition for writ of certiorari, meaning that they are trying to appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States, asking to help them out with getting Bill Cosby back into prison. So, Kurt, why don't you take it from there?
Okay, so the first thing that I think people should know is that the Supreme Court of the United States has the ability to decide federal law, and the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has the ability to decide state law. So the Supreme Court of the United States does not have any jurisdiction when it comes to state law issues. Now, the writ of certiorari, which is asking the court to do this, spends a total of 1 page, which is kind of hilarious because of how short it is. 1 page on the fact that there are federal issues here in play and not state issues. And I'm like, the 1 page is kind of telling me you have nothing. But they go through the analysis and say, well, they misinterpreted this U.S. Supreme Court case. They've misinterpreted a Third Circuit case. They misinterpreted cases from other federal courts. And so this decision from Pennsylvania is actually based on federal law, and they just misread it. To my money, I disagree with that for a couple reasons. First of all, they also cited a whole bunch of states, including Utah, as part of their analysis. So that it seems to me that they're citing it as what we call persuasive authority, as they're trying to decide their own state law. It's like, well, here's a bunch of things a whole bunch of courts have said on issues similar to this, and we're taking that into consideration as we're trying to decide what our own law is, rather than them basing the decision. So I didn't really buy that argument. And the other thing is that there were not substantial independent state grounds, which I disagreed with too. The writ of certiorari quotes one paragraph from the actual decision, and I think the paragraph they quote actually goes against them, because it starts talking about when there's a unilateral promise and they rely to their detriment. So I'm like, okay, this is, and I've sped read the decision again. For my money, the decision's based on contract law or promissory estoppel, take your pick. But either way, it's based on contract law. It's like, okay, the government, they didn't have a formalized plea agreement or formalized non-prosecution agreement, which incidentally, whoever Cosby's lawyers were at the time, that's a huge sin. And I don't know how they could have missed that. It's like, if you want to go down this road, I don't think you just want to rely on, oh, the prosecutor said this one time at a press conference. I think you want to get that one in writing. So major fault for Cosby's prosecutors. But in any case, or apologies, his defense lawyers. But in either case, what the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania said is they've made a unilateral offer. That sounds like contract law. And they relied on it. Sounds like contract or promissory estoppel. And so we're interpreting this as a agreed upon contract, like a formalized plea agreement or a formalized non-prosecution agreement, which is also interpreted based on contract law principles. And so like, okay, if it's based on contract law, that's purely state issues. There's nothing for the Supreme Court of the United States to do. So that's a problem. And then the other problem on top of that is there's Rule 10 of the U.S. Supreme Court, which says the Supreme Court rarely grants certiorari merely for misapplication of correctly stated law. So if the Pennsylvania Supreme Court made a mistake and they misapplied the law, the Supreme Court doesn't typically, very rarely, grant certiorari. So between the one page, them having nothing, between the fact that the underlying decision seems to be based on contract law rather than due process, and between the fact that Rule 10 suggests against it, I think there's a very basically zero chance of the Supreme Court granting it. And also, just by way of generalized statistics, the Supreme Court only grants 0.7% or 0.6% of cases. It's like 180 cases a year, or it's less than that now. It's like 120 cases a year out of 10,000 requests. So you would normally skew against, and then back based on all those factors, I think, the odds are zero. So how is that for a summary?
That is fantastic. Fantastic. I mean, that's even just getting in the door so that the Supreme Court would even hear it in the first place. Let's even assume that the Supreme Court was like, yeah, this seems like a good case to hear. I mean, just the argument that it would set a dangerous precedent to allow for criminal defendants to be able to rely on press releases by the prosecution. That to me just sounds insane, because we're talking about the prosecution represents the state. They represent the government. I mean, they have all of the weight in the world, right? We talked about this a ton with Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going to go with this, Lita, because that's what I'm thinking right now, is that at this point, I'm going to strip the prosecution of as much power and much authority as possible, because, we see how they abuse it. And you don't do that all at once. You do that one step at a time. And this is one step that I think would be, oh my gosh. That was so good. You know what? You're really helping me be my own judge. Legal mindset. All right. Anyway, so that being said, no, but really, it does. This is one step that I think we could scale this back, and I think it would be a win against prosecutorial overreach.
Yeah, because it's the idea that, I mean, if you really get down to it, the argument that this is going to set a dangerous precedent, who would this be prejudicing? It would be prejudicing the state.
Yeah.
Like the state. So are we really concerned about constitutional rights of the state? No.
I'm not,
at least as opposed to an individual. No, absolutely not. No. So this just seems like a huge waste of time and resources. And even though I just want to reiterate, Bill Cosby does not seem to be a good guy. You know, we know that he probably did all of the things that he did. He was actually convicted, and then, you know, the whole thing was overturned because of this issue, the bad deeds by the prosecution. So we can agree that Bill Cosby is a bad dude, and agree that the prosecution should not have their way in this case, because it's kind of bad dude against bad dudes.
And to be
we
fair,
we can also criticize the underlying Supreme Court of Pennsylvania decision. It's like, whether or not this is a contract, it's like maybe you're reading too much into it. And also the remedy, because there was a split. It was like 4-3 on the split. 4 people said this case is gone, no retrial, the prejudice is too much. 3 people said, let's just have a new trial without that piece of evidence, without his admissions coming in, because that's the prejudice. So we can disagree with this Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It's just that, you know, they're the last word on this issue. So whatever.